This is not just about one case, unfortunately. It's actually much larger than that. There's a group of cases known as the Redhead murders. The women who were believed to fall victim obviously had red hair. Their cases were perpetrated by one or more persons active between October 1978 through 1992. Starting in 1978, authorities began finding women with red hair around Tennessee, Kentucky, and neighboring states. This happened between 1983 and 1985. It was so worrisome that a multi-state task force was assembled. One of those victims was Tina Marie McKinney Farmer, whose identification I covered in the past. I'll provide a link in the description below if you're interested in revisiting that video. In these cases, however, victims were found near the highway. It means there could be more women out there, not found because they were disposed of in less accessible areas. Currently, there's thought to be as many as 15 victims. I got the idea of covering the unidentified cases as well as the identified, but went back and forth about covering who may have done it. I've been trying to scale back on talking about the perpetrators. This one is a little more complicated though, because I don't believe it's one perpetrator, and it might make a difference in identifying these women. To be fair, this entire case is guesswork to some degree, but as to whether or not the blame falls on one person, I'm not so sure. By the end of the research, I'd come to the conclusion there was at least 2 and maybe 3 perpetrators. I'd love to know what you think. It is likely that there was something to these cases because only 1 to 2% of the U.S. population has red hair. A lot of red-haired victims were found in a pretty defined area. An article from the Louisville paper in 1985 lists 8 victims the police believe are tied together. Also, which ones are even linked vary by source. The variable resources for this case is indicative of how confusing it is. Unfortunately, just who is connected and who it was done by is subjective at this point. Tina Marie McKinney Farmer, who I mentioned previously, is just one case. Another is the case of Lisa Nichols, who was 28 when she went missing from Rowan County in West Virginia. She went missing and was found in 1984 along Interstate 40 in Crittenden County, Arkansas. She was last seen leaving a truck stop in West Memphis. It's believed she was hitchhiking through the area. We know she left Rowan County and was eventually found in Marion, Arkansas. The 2 locations are 700 miles apart. She was in a sad way one of the lucky ones because she was identified 9 months later, in June of 1985. Far too many of these women went unidentified. Esprit Regina Black Pilgrim was a previous Jane Doe who was found in 1985 and identified in 2018. Espy was 28 when she went missing from Spindale, North Carolina. She was found on April 1st, 1985, near Gray, Kentucky. She was found inside an abandoned refrigerator that had a label on it that said Superwoman. A lead came in to investigators stating that she was possibly using a CB radio at the time, reaching out to truckers in hopes of obtaining a ride to North Carolina. As this is where she was from, it's possible she was trying to return home. Her case touched the community where she was found. When no one claimed her body and they couldn't find her name, a funeral was held and televised. More than 500 people were in attendance. They knew little of her, but they did know she'd given birth to a child who was out there somewhere. She was finally identified in the fall of 2018. It's proof of why the recreations matter. Her brother actually found Carl Koppelman's recreation of this Jane Doe, and he was shocked to realize not just that it looked like her, but he could tell that the necklace she was wearing in the recreation belonged to his sister. I'm always struck by these cases. I can't imagine how shocking it must be for a family member to suddenly realize they're looking at someone they once loved, someone they were missing. In all these cases, it seems they usually want to know what happened, but they're not prepared for what the truth actually is. In Espy's case, it took 33 years for her identification, and there are still more left unidentified. Other women believed to be linked to this case that I've covered already is the identification of Elizabeth Lamott Karen K. Nippers, Stacy Lynn Chahorsky, and Priscilla Ann Blevins. The 4 cases are linked in the description below. In the case of the Jellicoe Jane Doe, identified as Tana Marie Farmer, there was DNA and it was considered a closed case. The DNA of the perpetrator belonged to Jerry Leon Johns. It conclusively tied him to her case. Police believe he killed the 20-year-old Tana Farmer in December of 1984, treated her like garbage, throwing her off Interstate 75 near Jellicoe, Tennessee. Jerry Leon Johns was never questioned or forced to face any consequences in Tana's case, however, because he died in prison in 2015. And with him maybe died the knowledge of which of these women he was actually responsible for. He was convicted in 1987 of aggravated kidnapping, assault, and other crimes perpetrated on a woman he picked up in Knox County, Tennessee. This was just 2 months after he sealed Tana's fate. If one person was responsible for these women, it's possible Johns was it. The woman who survived had been similarly attacked and bound. Though absent the development of more DNA from these scenes, it's possible we'll never know. Anyone with any information on this case, however, is asked to call 1-800-TBI-FIND. Because this case weaves in and out, I wasn't sure how to present it. I had intended to simply follow up with the identification of one perpetrator, but it's not that simple, and I personally believe there are 2 or 3 perpetrators. I'm no professional, so don't take my word for it, but that's just my opinion. So at the risk of not helping somebody who needs it, I hope you will allow me to take a moment to cover some of the unsolved cases. The following cases are the unidentified women possibly linked to the Redhead cases. Some are likely not part of this pattern, but were added by the police just in case due to the color of their hair. Authorities began to find red-haired victims in 1978 around Tennessee, Kentucky, and neighboring states. This continued on, and some say the cases ended in 1983, others 1985, and some as late as 1992. It all varies depending on the source reporting. While it was hard to tell if it was one serial perpetrator or if it was more, the concern was so great that a multi-state task force was assembled. Because the women were in a high-risk group for the most part, it was hard to keep these women safe, even after it was recognized there was a problem. The following are the still unidentified victims. The Cheatham County Jane Doe, 1985. In this case, the skeletonized body of a red-haired female was located on March 31, 1985. The young woman was found in Pleasant View, Tennessee. I would implore anyone from the general area missing a loved one with red hair to investigate the unidentified Jane Does. She is believed to have lost her life somewhere from October 1984 to January of 1985. They believe she was likely 31 to 40. If this is true, her family is missing someone born between the years of 1945 and 1954. The clothing and hat shown here are the only clues to her identity. No recreation was ever done. Hopefully this clothing can be recognized by someone. Her teeth were overcrowded and had some overlapping. The Cheatham County Jane Doe has gone unidentified for 37 years. The Wetzel Jane Doe. The Wetzel Jane Doe was discovered on February 13, 1983, in Littleton, West Virginia. She was likely aged 30 to 45, and most likely on the older end of that. Meaning somewhere out there a family is missing a woman who was likely born from 1938 to 1953. Some people were out walking that day and happened upon what they believed was a mannequin. This apparent mannequin was lying over an embankment off U.S. Route 250. Then to their horror they realized it wasn't a mannequin, it was a person, and she'd been there 2 or 3 days. She had an upper denture, which was common at the time, but in this case it had likely just been fitted, probably about 8 weeks prior to her death. She was 5'5" to 5'6" and around 135 pounds. She has available post-mortem photographs online. I don't show these on this channel because I don't want to shock viewers, and I don't want to disrespect the Jane Doe. But if you think you might know her, please check out the Doe Network case 56UFWV. They have 3 different photos to compare her to. Some of the websites only have 1, so this one is the most comprehensive. Her eyes have long been presumed to be brown, although post-mortem changes often affect the eye color, so this should never be a deciding factor in whether or not someone thinks they may know who somebody was. I found an interesting statement in one of my reference articles. The iris itself doesn't change, but a film forms over the eye. Even brown eyes can change to a purplish blue color after 2 or 3 hours. I know personally when I've been searching for cases online, trying to match up a missing person with a Jane Doe, that I've dismissed it because of eye color. So it's important to take this into account. Anyone looking for the Wetzel Jane Doe would be looking for someone who had a baby via C-section. She also had a scar on one of her index fingers. Her body hair was described as well-groomed, leading investigators to think she didn't fit the characteristics often seen in a transient or a hitchhiker. So it's possible she was within days of travel from where she went missing. There was a witness who saw a white male who was around 5'10", weighing 200 pounds near where the body was found. They believe he was middle-aged at the time. And because this is 1983, that would mean this man is likely no longer alive. Someone 50 years old in 1983 would be 89 today. It's believed the Wetzel Jane Doe may have been last seen in Wheeling, West Virginia. This was at a local bar. The witness would say she was unsure if they were an employee or a customer there. If you have any information about this case, please call 1-800-TBI-FIND. The DeSoto County Jane Doe. A truck driver was passing through DeSoto County on January 24, 1985. DeSoto County is located in Mississippi. A woman was found by a truck driver driving southbound on U.S. Highway 78, just a few hundred feet east of the Coldwater River Bridge, at around 7:30 a.m. She was found just 20 feet south of the highway, with her shoes, undergarments, and her jacket missing. She'd been asphyxiated. There were a number of possible clues in addition to her having strawberry blonde to wavy red hair. She had gray or brown eyes. She was likely a heavy smoker with poor dental hygiene. They noted that at some point she'd had her fallopian tubes tied. She had deeply bitten fingernails, and on her right ankle there was a tattoo of the letters THC, and on the left ankle it said either RCJ, REJ, or RET. It was difficult for them to determine the exact initials. She was 5'2" to 5'4" and around 105 pounds to 130. There are post-mortem photos available online that might help with identification. I'm not an expert by any means, but honestly, the recreations don't look a lot to me like the post-mortem photo, although I would say the side view is closer to Carl Koppelman's depiction. Often it's very accurate, but in this case it looks greatly different to me. They believe she was 20 to 40, which would mean her family is looking for a loved one who was born 1945 to 1965. In a lot of the cases where the women are tied to the Redhead murders, the reference material refers to the fact that in 2019, it was announced that deceased trucker Jerry Leon Johns was responsible for at least one of the women. His DNA was linked to Tina Farmer. However, it's very much up in the air how many of the suspected victims are truly linked. Jerry Lee Johns was convicted in 1987, and some of these possible cases take place that year or after, so Johns can't be responsible for all. While I found 1992 to be the final year listed for the deaths, it appears that 1988 and 1990 are usually the last cases listed. I was unable to confirm when in 1987 Jerry Leon Johns entered prison. It's noted in the case that he got caught, he had a bizarre anger outburst at a woman not being a natural redhead. It's frustrating he died in 2015, so he was never questioned. The DeSoto County Jane Doe has gone unidentified for 37 years. The Pulaski County Jane Doe. On April 20th, 1985, a woman's skeletal remains were found 1/4 of a mile south of Wrightsville Park Road near Wrightsville, Arkansas. She was found 75 yards west of the Arkansas River. She was face down, and her clothes were about 70 feet away near the riverbank. They believe she was 30 to 40. It states she was skeletal in April of 1985. Her remains were very scattered, yet they state she was believed to have passed away in 1985. There isn't a lot on this case, and for obvious reasons, I feel like I need to say that if someone is looking for a family member, it could be someone who went missing in 1984. After all, she was skeletal 4 months into 1985. If they're right about her age, she was 30 to 40, and that would place her date of birth somewhere around 1945 to 1955. As always, though, if you're missing someone in your life, please take these as rough estimates. They do the best they can, but in older cases, it was really a lot of guesswork. Well, it probably still is, but they have more tools at their disposal. As for the Pulaski Jane Doe, they estimate her height at 5'3", blondish red hair, and her blouse was a size 5, so she was on the small side. She had broken her left femur, but likely didn't receive medical care for it. It wasn't set correctly, and it healed in a way that was slightly misaligned. The Pulaski Jane Doe has gone unidentified for 37 years. The Roane County Jane Doe. While this is listed as a possible redhead case, there are some differences. While I don't have the date Jerry Lee Johns was sentenced to prison in 1987, it's possible and maybe even probable that he was already in prison when this happened. So while he was responsible for Tana Farmer, likely more of these might not be linked to the others, or not linked to him. The Roane County Jane Doe was discovered on August 29, 1987 in Roane County, Tennessee. She was estimated to be white and between 35 and 50. She was most likely 5'0" to 5'8", which is a pretty wide estimate. She had naturally brown hair, which she dyed a reddish brown. There are quite a few clues that might help her family in identifying her. They noted that she'd had a hysterectomy and a tracheotomy. She had a mole that was located on the left side of her back, and she also had breast implants. Additionally, it was noted that she had an old gunshot wound to her third thoracic vertebrae, and it was notable because the bullet had remained lodged in her spine. Her remains had been burned, and the police believe the suspect did this in order to deliberately hinder identification. None of the other women, at least that I found, were burned, which is in part why I think this case is not related. If she was aged 35 to 50 as listed, it would mean her date of birth would be from 1937 to 1957. The Roane County Jane Doe has gone unidentified for 35 years. Update on the case of Stacy Lynn Chahorski, previously known as the Rising Fawns Jane Doe. This is a case I just covered. The person who took Stacy Lynn Chahorski's life wasn't known yet at the time of the first coverage. Genetic Genealogy and the GBI, which is the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, has identified that the man who took her life was Henry Frederick Wise, who was also known as Hoss Wise. Wise was 34 at the time, and Stacy was just 19. She had called her mother in 1988 to tell her she was going to hitch rides from where she was in North Carolina back home to Michigan. Stacy was officially reported missing in January of 1989, 4 months after she had called her mother. She had actually already been found by then along the highway in Dade County, Georgia. She'd been subject to SA and had been asphyxiated. She was then discarded as if she didn't matter. She would be identified in March of 2022 after 33 years. Hoss Wise was 34 in 1988 when he likely picked Stacy up hitchhiking home. He was working as a truck driver, traveling along the route for Western Carolina Trucking Company. That makes me wonder if he's responsible for more cases along this route. Way too often, these serial offenders were truck drivers. His route took him through Chattanooga to Birmingham and then on to Nashville. He had a criminal history that stretched through Florida, Georgia, and North Carolina. The charges went from theft and assault to obstructing a police officer. Wise met his own fate in a disturbing way, so perhaps karma's real. He died in a fiery car accident at Myrtle Beach Speedway in South Carolina in 1999. I dug until I found an article from that time, and it appears he'd gotten a car from a salvage yard. While it was a cheap choice for racing, it wasn't safe. For whatever reason that day, he chose not to wear a fire retardant suit. So when the car stalled and caught on fire, he was unable to escape. While he perished in a way that could be considered fitting, he still lived to age 44, which is 25 years more than he allowed Stacy. He had a number of felony arrests, and they had his DNA because DNA was mandatory for him. What bothers me, and I'd like to know how you feel about it, is that they had his DNA all along as being the perpetrator. They just didn't test it. They waited to test the DNA of her assailant until after they had her name. I do not remotely see how it matters. Maybe it makes the investigation portion of it easier, but they could have identified him all along, and perhaps he did this to other women. Instead, they didn't bother to test it until he was no longer alive. Joe Montgomery, a special agent with the FBI, said to the press, "The biggest problem in being able to solve this case is we had no identity of the victim, so we had no starting point. But we know in other cases they've done the DNA and the perpetrator ends up in prison. And what good did waiting go anyway? He didn't know Stacy Lynn Jaworski. He just picked her up. It's clear she was hitchhiking, and I just wonder how many women he did this to. If he got away with it once, what are the odds that was the only time? It's possible his DNA is sitting in other cases they also have not processed. If Stacy'd been allowed to live her life, she'd be 52 today. Henry Wise got to live for 44 years, 10 years more than Stacy got from the day they met. The link to Stacy Lynn Jaworski's case can be found in the description below. Thank you so much to everybody commenting. Even with just an emoji, it really has made a big difference. The current goal for the channel is 20,000 subscribers, but we aren't even halfway there as I record this. So if you enjoy the content here and you're not sure, take a peek to see if you're subscribed. Please consider subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss new episodes. Thanks everybody. Take care of yourselves and each other.